Welcome to the 2019 Eureka Alert PIO Seminar in Washington, D.C. My name is Brian Lin. I'm the Director of Editorial Content Strategy here at Eureka Alert. Thank you for making your way to join us, whether you've traveled from across town or from halfway around the world. For those of you joining us via the wonderful technology of live webcasting, welcome. As a communicator, I've always appreciated the privilege of asking very basic, or some might say stupid questions, to feed my boundless curiosity. In preparation for this seminar, I thought a lot about where I've been as a public information officer and wondered where I and we as a community of science communicators are headed. The media landscape has been changing, and as we discussed thoroughly last year, the role of PIO is also changing. And many of us are increasingly using channels other than the mainstream press to reach our audiences. So as we gaze into the crystal ball of science communication, yes, very scientific, I know, I thought it would be interesting to hear from some of our colleagues about their approach to direct-to-consumer communication, and also hear from some innovators about what new technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning may impact our work. If you're live tweeting, please use the hashtag PIOSem19. We're recording the entire event and the video will be made available early next week. You just need your Eureka Alert PIO credentials to access it. So let me introduce our speakers today. We have Sarah Collins, Communications Manager Research at University of Cambridge. Shannon Brescher-Shea, Senior Writer and Editor from the Office of Science Communications and Public Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy. Sabine Louette, Founder and CEO of SciencePod. And Marguerite Holloway, Director, Science and Environmental Journalism at the Columbia University Journalism School. Each of our speakers will give a short presentation and then we'll hold questions for the last half an hour. So I'd like to start with Sarah. When we hear about the University of Cambridge, we think, oh, they don't need to do any communication. They got a brand. And apparently I think the university thought so for a while. But I'd love to hear more about how you guys approach communications and how your direct-to-consumer communications is different from media relations.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. That any better? Oh. Maybe I just need to speak louder. Okay. Thanks, Brian, and thanks to all of you for joining us here today. I'm just going to give kind of a broad overview of why we do direct-to-audience communication, and then my colleague Shannon here is going to go into a little bit more detail. So Brian's question in terms of how direct-audience communication and media relations is different. I first wanted to start with, which may sound a bit obvious, which is the way that they're the same. Really kind of basic, that no matter which tools you're using to communicate, the same rules apply. You need to know who it is you're trying to reach and why it is you want to reach them, what would an ideal outcome look like. And at the end of the day, a good story is a good story, and no matter which tools you're using to tell them or who you're telling them to, our goal is to get people to engage with research. The difference is often, but not always, the difference between reach and significance. My colleagues in public engagement speak about their public engagement onion, which has many layers. So on the outer layers, you have the things that are probably most of our bread and butter, which is things like press releases, resulting media coverage, TV shows and documentaries, and stories on our websites. And then as you go into the layers, you look at things like exhibitions, public debates, education and outreach programs. Then you start to get into things like consulting and polling, advisory committees, focus groups, and then finally you're looking at things like public representation on committees or patient panels, to the point where your audiences are involved in the actual process of decision making. So as you go from the outer layers to the inner layers, you're decreasing reach, but increasing significance. And most of what we do as PIOs will continue to be on the outer layers of that onion. But I think that it's in all of our interests, and certainly in our interests at Cambridge, to think about how we might use what we do to start to penetrate into the layers of that onion. Universities like us at Cambridge we're really at the front lines of change, but we can be instruments of change, like providing data and expertise and experts. So even though we're in a time when we're told that people don't trust institutions, and I think maybe that is true, trust in academics, which is an important resource for us who are based at universities, it's still relatively high. A YouGov poll showed that standing was in trust in academics was 57% in the US and 64% in Britain, which is what counts as high these days, I guess. So it's in our interest for, beyond us as PIOs, but the academics and researchers that we work with to get involved in public discussions around science and research. We have an extensive public engagement program at Cambridge, and we've had anecdotal evidence from them that engaging with the public sort of helps sharpen their minds about why they do what they do, and we hope that their research will be the better for it. Obviously, this is more pointed in sort of biomedical end of things, but I think sort of across all the fields of research that we cover, I hope that will be true. In terms of us at Cambridge, we don't think that reaching everyone should be the goal. We're never going to reach everyone. We're never going to change everyone's mind. And we certainly do lots of press releases, and the press release is an important tool, and the media is an important audience to reach them. But press releases are a pretty blunt instrument, really. And I think we're going to start trying to do fewer of them and sort of do more feature-based, looking at the entire field of research. But press releases can be part of that kind of drip effect, but a single media hit isn't really going to change anyone's mind. A lame joke that I like to tell was that 50 years ago, people thought Cambridge was full of posh people and good at science, but now they think that Cambridge is full of posh people and good at science. So, I mean, that's never a battle that we're going to win. So big media outlets can certainly help you reach the most people, but the challenge, as I'm sure you all know, is whether you reach the right people. And that sort of thing is far more challenging to measure. That can be hard for us as PIOs. We all have bosses who I'm sure want to see lines going up. And it's easy to measure media coverage or hits on a website or retweets. But how do we ever know that our research and our researchers are making a difference? I can't claim that we have the answers to that at Cambridge. We do have a brand, but we certainly don't have all the answers. We only set up a research comms team in 2010. We didn't have any communications function of any kind until the 90s, late 90s. So the reason why we set up a research comms team was that, the ethos behind it then and now was that Cambridge research is important, and we want people to know about it. And as a public institution, most of our research is funded by the taxpayer, and we have a duty to communicate to the taxpayer what we're doing with their money and why it matters. And additionally, sort of dwindling newsroom resources then and now meant that huge sections of our research would never get coverage. So, I mean, if we just based the stories that we wrote based on coverage, we would cover probably the same 10 to 15 types of stories over and over again, which does a disservice to the university. Like a lot of us in this room, at Cambridge, we take a story-first approach. We still have to tell sort of corporate stories about the episode of buildings or whatever. That's just part of the job. But we want to write well-written, engaging stories that can stand alone. The media landscape being what it is in the UK, our stories often get lifted and placed wholesale on news outlets with someone else's byline on it. But that's fine. It's not really the point, but we'll still take a big media hit where we can get it. We do things, we allow comments on our website and our social media channels, including ones that are critical. importantly in areas like animal research, where in the UK we have a concordat on openness in animal research, which means that we're totally upfront about the work that we do and why we do it. We've produced films about our animal research in mice and in non-human primates, and we want to have that discussion with our audiences. And we hope these sorts of things can help our credibility. We need to obviously convince our researchers to get involved in these conversations. Sometimes they're great at it, and sometimes they just need a little bit of prodding. With regards to conversations, one thing that I think we've been less good at Cambridge is using social media as a conversation tool. I think a lot of us have used social media as a broadcasting tool. We've had literally no resource for social media until about a year ago. And we don't have the budget to do promoted content at all. It sounds like a no-brainer to make social media into conversations, but again, it's something that just we haven't done because we haven't had the resource to really make that a focus. So things like asking questions of your audience and sort of getting them involved in conversations. I think a lot of us saw social media as a way to bypass the media entirely and reach our audiences directly, and we all know that it hasn't been the panacea that we all thought it was going to be. Reach of our stories has dropped dramatically, and as I just said, sort of, we don't pay for it to reach more people. In terms of the audiences that are following us on social media, I think our Facebook audience in particular is quite large. We realize that at Cambridge we're very lucky to have a brand that's known around the world, and that is an advantage that we have. But frankly, our Facebook audience would like to see pictures of Apple twice a day, every day, and they would be delighted with that. And we get lots of likes and lots of clicks, but we're not really moving the conversation forward. So it's a little harder for research content. So we still get decent reach and engagement on Facebook, but it's not anywhere near where it was a few years ago. And as I said, the conversations that we do have on Facebook aren't especially relevant to the content. Twitter, I think, like all of us, is probably the most relevant in terms of the types of audiences that we want to reach. Obviously, lots of journalists and politicians and scientists and policymakers that we want to reach. We finally got on board with Instagram stories for research content. As I said, we haven't invested much in social media, so we're still getting there. We're still trying to see what works for us. Interestingly, we found that the social media channel that we've had the most engagement with is Reddit, where if a story goes big, if something is driving lots of hits to our website, it's most often because it's gone big on the Reddit science subreddit. And for me as a communicator, I actually find this really gratifying because when something's going big on the science subreddit, people are actually talking about content. And that's ultimately what I want to see, and sort of what makes me feel good. And obviously that's quite a specialized audience, but it shouldn't be ignored. Other things that we're doing is our website is hopelessly out of date. It's 5 years old and it looks about 20 years old. Okay. We recently invested in Shorthand, which I'm sure probably some of you at least are familiar with, which is a storytelling platform where you can tell in-depth, long-form types of stories. And our early evidence shows that people are spending a lot more time reading those stories, which is a metric. Again, back to my original point, we don't know that we're reaching exactly the right people, but that people are at least reading it is something to look at as a positive. The last thing I wanted to talk about is that we still produce an actual physical printed magazine, which unfortunately is at the printers as we speak, so I don't have the most recent copy with me. But the most recent edition of this magazine was one looking at our interactions in our region of England, so Cambridge and the surrounding counties. Cambridge is one of the most unequal cities in the UK, and the area surrounding Cambridge is one of the most unequal in the UK. It's an area outside of Cambridge City. It's one that voted heavily for Brexit, and one that, Brexit happens, I'm trying to say that twice, will suffer, frankly. And I think a lot of people outside of Cambridge City, if you ask them how the University of Cambridge affects their lives, they would probably say either A, it didn't, or B, it was for the worse. It was doing things like burning house prices up and forcing people to move further afield because they couldn't afford to. So we work quite closely with our public affairs team, which is also based in our central communications office, and look for those connections around the Cambridge area. We did a full-scale survey of all of our researchers across the university and got a pretty good response rate. I think we got about 300 examples of research projects that were taking place in the area around Cambridge. So then we whittled that down based on looking at things like the UK government's industrial strategy and finding those linkages. And we worked really closely in preparing the articles with partners in every single case, not just giving them a name check, but interviewing them, photographing them, doing films, all those sorts of things to really sort of show that the connections, even if people don't realize that Cambridge research is a million miles away from out in the fence, that there is actually quite a lot of benefit to them. So hopefully we'll see how that goes. We're doing a launch event in Parliament in a few weeks. For the B word. But we want to show, sort of in a real way, how our research is affecting people's lives in a positive way. So yeah, that's sort of how we do what we do and what we do. And
I certainly feel better about the little resources we had, and how early we started thinking about communications. So Shannon, working with the DOE, which is mainly known as a government agency or perhaps a funder, what are the challenges of communication and how do you define audiences and how to reach them?
Yeah, so as Brian said, we are mainly a funder, but we also heavily manage and do project management of that research and love talking about that research. Because if we don't talk about it, then we'll know what we do. And honestly, most people don't even know DOE is a science agency. They think we only do nuclear weapons, or maybe we work on oil drilling, which we do not. And so one of our main jobs is to help people know that when we are a science agency, we're one of the biggest science agencies. And in fact, we're the biggest funder in the federal government of basic physical sciences. Not NSF, it's Department of Energy, and specifically Office of Science, which is where I am. And so, but we have a pretty small communications team in our office. And so we work with our 10 national laboratories that the Office of Science manages to do two things. The first is to amplify their stories, because a lot of them have very substantial communications offices, like, Berkeley Lab or Argonne National Laboratory or Brookhaven Lab. You may have heard of those, and they have great communications teams. So we don't want to overlap with what they're doing. They put out great press releases about their studies that are coming out, and so we amplify them on our website and on our Twitter, and then we focus more on the long-form sort of stories of how the science happens. Not just one study, but the process of how all of these studies combine together, or the studies that are multidisciplinary or multi-institutional that the labs wouldn't necessarily tell on their own because they want to tell their own stories. And so we get to put it in that broader, larger context that also includes its societal impact and making it so people are like, oh, there's 10 labs, they must all do the same thing. No, they're all complementary. All these studies go together, and this is how we show it. And that's the sort of thing that helps, for example, our funders, which is Congress, understand that better. Knowing that our labs do such great work and that we are pretty small, we focus not on trying to educate the general public or raise awareness of science in general. Something that's of note is that unlike NASA or NSF, public education is actually not in our mission. It kind of goes back to the days of the old, Atomic City and things like that. DOE started in secrecy. We're not anymore, of course, but we do try to focus our efforts on where we think it will have the most impact, which for us is what we call either the science interested or science engaged, and more specifically within that audience, science influencers. So we try to influence the people who go to talk to Congress, whether that at trade organizations like AAAS or AGU, or people who are research deans in universities, or even the public information officers of universities, like many of you. And so I'm going to talk about what we do, but also how what we do can help inform what you do and who your audiences are, because I know some of them are going to be the same, but a lot of them are going to be different. So as Sarah said, non-media platforms, why even bother using them, right? A big part of it is because you can tell the story you want to tell. You don't have to go through a third party. You can tell those big picture stories, or you can tell the story of the process of science that may not be newsy enough or sexy enough for the media to pick up on, but are still really important stories for the people you're trying to talk to and for the story that you're trying to tell, the message you're trying to get across. You can build more relationships with those audiences. Again, you're not going through a third party. There's more of a sense of intimacy and more trust that you can build. And you can put it where your audience is going. A lot of people do get their information from mass media, but increasingly they're going straight to the source. As Sarah said, universities are trusted. In some areas, they're more trusted than local media. People would rather go to a university's website and find out what you're doing than their local paper. So that's a really, really big advantage that we have and that we can take advantage of. And you can focus more on outcomes rather than output. It's easier when there's fewer people in the way, or fewer people just in between, not in the way, because obviously media is very, very important, and journalists are an essential partner to us, or maybe not even partner, but essential to us. But it's easier to measure from A to B what those results on attitudes or changes in behaviors are if you're talking directly to people. And so what are sort of those main audiences and how do we reach them, right? Know your audience, of course, rule number 1 of communications. For most of us, we're probably going to have 4 audiences that we're going to talk to via these non-media platforms. They're going to be your funders, and in our case it's Congress, in your case it may be a government agency, it might be a foundation. It's going to be your institutional leadership. They want to know, well, why are we funding science rather than putting it towards something else, a new football field, the arts department, whichever. And 3, your potential students and researchers, people who are looking to come to your institution, and 4, your local community, as Sarah was talking about. First, your funders. Your funders will be thrilled, of course, if you get an article in the New York Times, but they're also going to be really excited just by you telling them that you're writing about the stuff they're funding. First, acknowledging their funding is huge. At least in the US government, you are required in academic papers to acknowledge government funding, but it can go so much further if you acknowledge it in your press release as well, or your feature story. And if you do it in the body of the story, not just in boilerplate that could get cut off if somebody picks up your story in media, it makes a huge difference to us. We really, really, really appreciate it. I am not understating this, or overstating this rather. And then if you come and tell us that you did that, we've worked really hard at the Department of Energy to build relationships with the universities that we give funding to the point that many university PIOs now reach out to our stakeholder engagement person, who is only one person, and tell her when they've put out press releases. We work with 300 to 400 universities a year, because that's how many we give funding to. And so if we find out from all those people the press releases they're putting out on funding we've supported, that's a huge tool for us to be able to go to, when Congress asks, hey, what are you funding? Oh, look at all this great stuff that, the universities have sent us. And it helps us say, oh, we're more than just the national labs. We're also working with all these people across the country. It's a really powerful message. But if you don't acknowledge us, we can't promote it on our website or on our Twitter. So that acknowledgement, plus letting your funders know that you are acknowledging them and that you're putting stuff out, is a huge tool to, again, help them know that you're talking about them and what they're getting for their funding. These funders want to know what their money is doing and that it's being used well, and what's coming out of it. Another way that you can appeal to these funders is by going through respected third-party but non-media platforms like Eureka Alert. And we actually just launched a new Eureka Alert portal. There it is. For the Department of Energy, Office of Science, and so all of our national labs post things on here. When I write feature stories as a PIO, it gets posted on here. And then also universities that tag the Department of Energy in their press releases get put up on here automatically. So these are really well respected. People may not come to your websites, but a lot of people go to Eureka Alert or similar platforms for their news. And it's all in one place, which makes it really convenient. And that's where we go. If you didn't tell us about your press release coming out, but we looked on our portal, hey, we're going to find out about it because you tagged us in it as a funder. So those are a great way to build trust. And then these sort of scientist to the public forums, things like social media or websites like The Conversation, where scientists write articles about their work, putting it in this contextual, societally contextual context, and helping people understand that bigger picture. Again, we want to know what the bigger picture is too. That's great that you've made this really specific, important move forward on a chemical reaction and a catalyst, but what's the bigger picture of that? Oh, this catalyst is used to make it so you could potentially make fertilizer much less, use a lot less energy to produce it. There we go. We can talk about that. And these social media and things like The Conversation are a great way to talk about that bigger context that may not be covered in the paper itself. Your second group, your own institution's leadership, right? Very similar in some ways to funders, similar attitudes, similar needs. They want to know that they want to be their institution to be seen as leaders in scientific thought leadership, to be seen as the place that people go to for science. And so you're going to reach them in similar ways. One way to reach them is to tell them if your funder did pick up something that then they promoted on Twitter or on their website. Institutional leadership loves to hear that the people who give them money is paying attention to them. These third-party platforms are also really effective. Next, your potential researchers and students. These are people who, if they come to your university or institution, want to know that they're going to be welcomed, that you're going to share their vision, that they're going to feel as if their research is important, right? And these are people you want to build a relationship with. It may not be a personal relationship. You know, you're not going to be able to reach out to every potential researcher, every potential student that's going to come there, but they can feel like they have an investment in you through things like social media. Now, in terms of social media, as you said, it's got to be a conversation. I know in the government, we can't respond to people necessarily just because of restrictions that we have on things like asking questions, because we're not allowed to do surveys. But there are other ways you can build that. You can build relationships and retweet things from other institutions, from other agencies, that help people see, oh, I see that they are talking to a different institution I respect. I can see that, oh, that's really great content, even though it's not theirs. And so where are you going to find these folks? First, for researchers, you're seeing a lot of science conversation, both scientist to scientist and scientist to public on Twitter. I find Twitter to be very geeky. People respect more technical content. We've done a thing called Science Never Sleeps, which we post on Friday, Saturday, Sunday afternoons and evenings. That's done incredibly well. And there's a lot of people clicking through to summaries of our research papers that we never expected to get this, but people are really interested and engaged in it. So Twitter, you can be a little bit more on the technical side while still having a really fun and engaging outlook. If you're looking for researchers who are doing a lot of public outreach, Instagram is the place to go, especially if you want to communicate about your process of science. You want to get people engaged on, here's what happens when I go out in the field, here's what I'm doing in the lab. Because it's so visual, you can focus more on that process-oriented part. And then if obviously for people looking for jobs, LinkedIn, and that's where you can put things like fellowships and internships and things for that audience. For potential students, you're going to also look on Twitter, but especially more on Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, where people who are younger tend to spend more time. Where you're probably not going to go for either of these audiences is Facebook. And that's because researchers use Facebook personally, possibly, to look at, their friends' kid baby photos, but they're not using it professionally. And when you're looking to attract people professionally, you want to reach them where they are professionally. And then younger folks, students, just tend not to use Facebook because it's mainly for people who are a little bit older. Not old, but older. Not so much, you're not getting your undergrads or even your younger grad students so much on Facebook anymore. And then your last audience is your local community. We want to have good relationships with the people around us. We don't want them to see us as the tower on the hill or what's been popularized for Department of Energy lately in the news is Stranger Things, the weird lab that nobody ever goes in. No, that's not who we are. And we're not just all academics who don't touch people's lives. These are places where you can build face-to-face relationships because you're in their community, right? So public outreach events that are actually in communities can be really powerful. PubSci events where scientists go out of the community and talk about their science to people in restaurants or bars or cafes. Open houses where you invite people in. Some of our national labs have had huge success. Thousands of people come to their open houses to find out what they're doing, and people get really excited. Public lectures. These are all ways to build that relationship. And then for those who maybe don't want to come face to face, this is where social media can come in, and especially Facebook. Facebook is where people go to look for local news. And if you're in that community, you're local news. And so it's a great opportunity to talk about those local stories like the ones that Sarah was talking about in the magazine, because that's what people are looking for there. So just to sum up, you know your audiences, you want to reach them where they are, you want to bring them what they need to know and communicate what you want them to know and to tell your own stories. And whether it's your website as sort of a one-stop shop, even if that's not the first place anybody goes, or social media, or there's third-party platforms, or even in-person events, there's a lot of options beyond just traditional mainstream media. And it's up to us to take advantage of all of them. So we can get our message to the people who want to hear it, when they want to hear it, and where they want to hear it. Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. So now I want to sort of look into the future and almost in a way separate science from science fiction. This idea of artificial intelligence taking over our jobs, writing press releases for us. So I'm going to give the unenviable positions to Sabine and then Marguerite.
Okay, you ready to have a few stories about your future? We are going to try and share what we've been doing. So my name is Sabine Louette. I'm the founder and CEO of a startup based in Dublin, Ireland, called SciencePod. So SciencePod stands for Science Pros on Demand. That's the secret meaning. We've been in operation for the past 4 years, but my own career has been in science journalism. I was previously working for Nature Biotechnology as a news editor, among other things, but the bulk of my career has been in Europe. So I am delighted to be invited here today. It's my first visit to the AAAS headquarters, and it's a pleasure to be on such an interesting panel. So before I start, I'd like to ask you, how many of you in your daily job rely on any form of automation or artificial intelligence algorithm to do your job? Not too bad, not too bad. At least 10 people. So that's really good. So you probably know what I'm going to tell you already. My talk is going to really be a snapshot of my journey. I was working in publishing, and I decided that some of the publishing houses were not agile enough, were not spending enough time trying to find new solutions to make the day-to-day jobs of people like yourselves and like journalists, easier. And I took the leap and created my own startup. So the way I framed my vision was to look at how we could extract science from the literature where it was buried in very technical terms, and how we could translate it into simple digital messages in the form of news story, feature stories, magazine-style content, infographics, podcast, and video interview, and this sort of format. And when I started to investigate how these things could be done, I obviously initially relied on an amazing community of science journalists and editors that we've gathered around our platform, the SciencePod platform, which is really a productivity tool that allows people like yourselves to place orders to create press releases or journalistic content by working in collaboration with teams of science journalists and editors through the platform, which helps you to create stories that have been quality controlled, in line with the rules of publishing. The problematic that we are facing, and you're facing in your day-to-day job now, is that you're under increasing pressure in the era of the internet to tell more stories about research and innovation in less time without compromising on quality. Because you're doing science. It has to be accurate, it has to be scientifically correct. And one of the questions I've been asking myself as part of my journey was to look at whether we could potentially rely on automation. And what I mean by automation is algorithm from artificial intelligence to make our lives easier. So before I move on and use all these jargon and acronyms, I wanted to clarify what I mean by artificial intelligence. There are two subsections of artificial intelligence I've been looking into. One is called natural language processing, which is about having algorithms capable of reading language that's been written by humans. And there's another field called natural language generation, NLG, which is about the ability of algorithms to write as if they were humans. So without you noticing in the interim. And this has led me to investigate the matter a bit further, particularly when it comes to natural language generation. I then went to visit these trade fairs for the digital news media, the mainstream media. And they've actually been a lot quicker off the mark than people in the science publishing industry, for instance. They've already automated news stories. It all started in 2014. Some of you may remember the first automated story that was written by an algorithm. It was 6:25 in the morning. The journalist who covered the story was still in bed, but he had put in place a little system that was capable of reading data coming from the US Geological Survey. And his system was designed to trigger above a certain data of earthquake. So the system was telling, any tremor that was recorded, and because that threshold was reached that day, then it triggered the creation of this automated story, which really reported on the tremor. So the guy who's behind it is called Ken Schwenker, and he was a journalist and a programmer at the LA Times. And that's since been pretty much emulated by a huge number of other people. And because we're in Washington, D.C., the Washington Post famously has developed their own system, Heliograph. And that's not just them. When you look at the top three logos on this slide, you can see that they're one of the most active players in this field in the US. Then the J++ United Robots are in Sweden. Scilabs is in France. Herbs Media is in the UK. AX Semantics is in Germany, and Narrativa is in Spain. So this really goes to show that technology is becoming quite mature. They're all using the same principle. So typically, just to give you an example, they rely on publicly available data I'm just going to take, data about the number of bike theft in a given territory, in a given country. So from that data, they look at interesting patterns, maybe clusters of bike thefts in certain region or certain area. And then from these clusters, they impose some rules. How do we prioritize? Let's say any area that has more than 10,000 bike theft every year. And then from that data, they automatically extract those locations that have had a very high cluster of bike theft, and they plug the data into a pre-written story. So that story is written by what is known in the field as a meta writer. So they anticipate what the story should look like, and then the algorithm automatically plugs the data as it comes out, and it gets published. So this is the general principle of how these things work. And of course, if you apply this sort of thing to the same, to different locations, you get similar stories. You can see Cambridge is the bike theft capital of the UK, but the people in Sweden who did the same exercise actually found that Göteborg was the bike theft capital in Sweden. So, you get a recipe applied to a similar set of public data, and you get similar news stories. So this is interesting because it allows to cover routine things. It's quite a tool that can save quite a lot of time and effort to journalists. And just to give you a top-level view, it's been used in earnings report. I mean, AP is using it. The likes of Forbes, Fortune are using it. Fox. Big Ten Network, AP is using it. A lot of people are using it in the industry. This is almost old news. Then people in the sports reporting, and you can think about cases where your local soccer team or your local Gaelic football team has won the game, but there's no reporter present to report on these things. The local newspaper doesn't have enough people to go and report on every single match. So if the data is posted on websites, it's possible to harvest that data and turn it into automated news. This has been done for real estate prices. That's a case in Sweden, an example. And this has been done for politics. But obviously, who wants to hear about politics these days? So moving swiftly along, I just wanted to share how we've moved on from looking at what the mainstream media has done and applying it to science. Because the problem with science is you don't always have clean data like a US Geological Survey, data from earthquake. That doesn't always happen. I mean, in biology, the data sets are so complex that you can't just churn out a new story out of it. So you have to look at the problem from a different angle. The problem of automating that storytelling, or part of the storytelling in this case, has to be solved differently. And this is how I started investigating the possibility of looking at the source of what a typical news story in science is, the original research paper, and thinking, how can we extract that information of the achievement of that individual team of scientists? And I looked into summarization, automated summarization. I approached an amazing team of seasoned scientists who've been working on the topic for pretty much all their career. And we've been developing a prototype to summarize research paper into 300-word summaries. So what's the rationale for doing this? As a public information officer, you need to sometimes get to the news quicker because you have so many scientists in your institution, you cannot physically read all of their research papers. So you're going to have to find a way to curate those papers, and 300-word summaries seems like the right kind of length to be able to curate a large number of papers. Also, what these summaries can do is, because they're a lot more accessible than the original peer-reviewed research paper, they can help discover the work. Even if you're not an expert in the field, you're still capable of reading something that's written in a particular language. And of course, it's all about efficiency and productivity tool. There's also a bigger level rationale in the world of science where we live. For institution, is the move towards open access is triggering a whole new way of working, because increasingly the focus is on individual scientists, and individual scientists become the brand of the university, the person who's going to showcase the achievement of the university. So there's a very strong rationale to showcase their work by attracting the attention through summaries. There's also some other advantages of doing this. Is typically research nowadays is becoming increasingly multidisciplinary. So I've seen cases where biologists were looking at how to prevent heart disease, like ischemic heart disease. And in order to do that, they had to study the blood flow in the heart. And they turned to physicists who, of course, have all the tools about fluid dynamics to see how blood flows in a chamber like a heart. So without having a common language to translate the capability of a physics model for a biological study, they couldn't have done it. So this is why it's so important to go to that middle language with the likes of summary. Of course, other people need to simplify or make their work more accessible to funding agencies. So that's where we also play a role. And there's certainly a very strong case for greater accountability. I think the first two panelists have said that as well, that when it comes to public funding, accountability is key and is mandatory. I mean, I know you mentioned that DOE funding had it. In Europe, any EU grant is also comes with a warning that you have to be accountable to taxpayers. And finally, the other big elephant in the room that people have alluded to is to help contribute to evidence-based policy making. Because to this day, a lot of the policy decisions are still not always informed by evidence. And this is true not just here, pretty much in every country. There is no clear-cut, transparent path for scientific evidence to be taken into account in policy making. So there's a lot of reason why we need to bring science out of the silo, out of the scientific literature. Now I just wanted to share what we've done. This is a sample. This is from my prototype. There was no human harmed in the process of creating that summary, be reassured, other than the scientists who really sweated on making it happen. So you can see at the top, this is from the European Physical Journal, one of our partner in this study. You have the original title of the paper. Then further down, you have keywords. They're keywords which represent the most important concepts that are ideas that are in the paper, not concept. Then we have acronyms spelled out. And then we have automatically matched the most technical terms in the paper with their lay definition. So that anyone who's a professional, who's not an expert in the field, is capable of understanding what the summary below that's in lots of colors actually mean, because they have immediately the definition above. So this is as good as it gets for now. We're working on refining this process. We're working very hard at finding partners who can help us put those summaries into wider context. And I think Marguerite will give us insights into how these things could be done. So what we've learned is that algorithms are a long way from writing proficiently, which is good news, because that means your job is pretty secure. And so what you can expect from artificial intelligence is that you're going to be spending less of your time doing the boring bits that the algorithm's going to do for you, the curation, and so on and so forth, and you're going to be spending more of your time doing the brainy bits. Finding the right angle for the story and making sure that it gets heard in the right circle. So, there's nothing to be worried about. So our ambition is not just to do summaries, it's to bring science to wider audiences, as wide as possible. And this is why we're developing currently this summarization tool to be combined with our existing platform, which allows then human journalists, professional, our beautiful international community of science journalists who are not only are mostly trained in science at degree or PhD level, but also have either experience of working in the media or working in science publishing. And we're always recruiting more people, and I welcome more independent journalists to register on the platform, and editors, of course. So that we can tell those stories of science with beautiful language written by professionals, and then use the summarization as a way of getting inspiration for stories. So this is my story. You're very welcome to come and ask questions at the end. I've left a few leaflets here at the front and in the entrance on the ledge, so you can always contact me later as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Sabine. So my guess is that it's technology is better than the Microsoft paperclip, not quite ready to take over our jobs. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of context, because as PIOs do more and more direct-to-consumer communication, that there's more and more burden placed on us to put a single paper in the context of larger landscape. And I know that has always been difficult for me in working with multiple papers, multiple scientists, and not having a scientific background to make that a big part of my work. And fortunately, I found something called Science Surveyor that seems to be going in that direction. So Marguerite will tell us a little bit.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to tell you a bit about Science Surveyor. It's a prototype, so it's not something that actually is usable at the moment, but I'll tell you about its history and what we hope to do with it, and perhaps some collaboration in the future. The Science Surveyor really grew out of a frustration that Brian has referred to, which is that I teach journalism and science journalists, and I know many other science journalists who have a lot of trouble reporting with deep context on a study that is coming out and that they have to produce a story out of within a few days. If they know the field well, it's no problem. But if they're a generalist and they're put on top of a story that they don't know something about, it can be really difficult. So the idea behind Science Surveyor, which has a very big team, started in 2014 with the collaboration between Columbia University School of Architecture, School of Journalism, and Stanford University, specifically people in the natural language processing division. The idea was that we would take a peer-reviewed study that was maybe under embargo. We would take the abstract and the citation, and we would work with the database. And Stanford had done a bunch of work with Web of Science, so that was the one we used for our prototype. Actually, let me just jump back a moment before I get to Stanford. Before I get to Stanford, Columbia was working a little bit by itself, and it had grand schemes and Stanford. So we thought we had no really very minimal computational chops. And we thought we would submit this abstract of this peer-reviewed study, and we generate out of the database. We would generate out of this database sort of a timeline of work in the field. We would be able to pull out the funding, sort of characterizing it. Maybe X amount came from the federal government, another amount came from corporations, and then a consensus layer. You would be able to see where this new study maybe sort of fit in the realm of ideas in the field. So this is very pretty, isn't it? It's completely not impossible. So we explored this a little bit, and we didn't get all that far. And then we started collaborating with Stanford, with the NLP experts. And what we did was we did build this prototype that did aspects of what we were hoping for. And you can put in the abstract, the citations, then the algorithms go into this sort of slice of Web of Science that we were working with, and they would pull out all of the articles that were related sort of to 3 hops of citations, so the citations of the original study, the citations of the studies that one cited, and then one more level. And then the algorithms would go out and they would look for 1,000 articles that had similar keywords that were not caught by the original 3 citation hop. And then they would generate sort of visual summaries that we hoped would allow journalists to very quickly get a sense of the context, sort of the history of the research in the field, an idea of perhaps people they might want to call. And it's not producing a story in any way. It's just trying to help journalists get a sense of the bigger picture so that they can report quickly. And we worked, we were only working with this slice of Web of Science, so we worked on 11 case studies that were either stories, papers that had been misreported by the press, misunderstood, studies that found different conclusions, studies that found the same thing. We were trying to sort of see whether the algorithms work. And I'm going to run you through one of the cases, which was a study that got really crazy headlines, like global warming, blame the trees. And it turned out it was that methane was released by plants under aerobic conditions. It hasn't really stood up, and it has been sort of a classic case that I share with my students about and I just described to you the technique, but what happened in this case is that we could pull up the top 10 highly cited researchers in the corpus that the algorithms generated. And you can see that the ones that the study cited are in red. So you knew that those were people that were probably directly in that field and maybe were familiar with that line of work. But then there are a bunch of other people who you might talk to as well, who are also seem to be publishing a lot and cited, but are not cited by the specific paper. We had a fantasy, another fantasy, which was that we could provide emails, phone numbers. That did not work. And we also can't really, we don't have the capability of telling you where these people are, whether they're still around, etc. But at least there's some pen names there that can help journalists start their research. Then we had an activity in the field, which was that timeline. So that was very successful. And you can, I'll show you on the live site if we have time and if it loads. You can choose year so that the number of studies are rated by year. You can say number of studies and it will give you the year that has the most number of studies, although it's pretty easy to see, and then by citation rates. And the darker the color, the higher the citation rate. And if you scrolled over any one of those bars on the live site, up in red, you can see how many studies were cited from by this new paper that you're reporting on in that year. And then we thought it would be really interesting to get some of the interesting, iconic studies out of the corpus that we created. So these are 5 most cited studies in the context, 5 most cited studies in recent years, and 5 oldest studies in the context, so that journalists could again get a sense of the range and perhaps use these studies as a way of finding persons to talk to. I highlighted one line, and it did work where you could scroll over the title of the paper and then you could actually see the authors. We played with... I'm not... Is that better? Oh, sorry. Okay. So this didn't go anywhere, but this was really interesting. We wondered if, and it gets back to that little diagram I showed you at the beginning of a consensus, whether you could see ideas sort of clustered together that were similar and see whether this new paper fit into the sort of the same realm of ideas. We had this thought that, or we began to see in some of the cases, that a paper that was really out there did not cite a lot of light papers, which is not surprising, but you can get this agreement score. And if agreement score is 0, that means it's not citing a lot, and that might mean a sort of a flag to a journalist, like, okay, this is maybe very surprising, and maybe you need to be really careful in your reporting, really sort of go much more deeply. I mean, we should go deeply all the time, but this could be sort of some way of maybe flagging that for journalists. And again, we're using the same iconography. If this paper that I was reporting on had cited any of the top 25 articles in the corpus, it would be outlined in red, and as you can see, it was not. And then this is our favorite nerdy aspect of our project, which most people didn't. We've shown this to a bunch of people, and they don't like this. But we really like this. It's everything that the algorithms brought into the corpus. It's all the papers arranged by the one that you're reporting on, that's under embargo, that's up there in the red. And then it shows you sort of the whole history of the field. And the highly cited papers are the ones that are the darkest. The ones that are cited by the paper you're reporting on are outlined in red. And our amazing graphic designer and programmers made it possible so that if you go over any one of these squares, the name of the paper comes up and the authors come up. And then you can arrange it by language similarity and by citation rate, etc. And what's really exciting to me is that I get a sense of like the history of this field, sort of the magnitude of it, or at least of all these keywords and these citation hops. And I can see sort of the big picture of whether the study authors were citing more recently, where they were citing in the past, whether they're citing the highly cited. I find that really fascinating. I can go to the site in a moment and show you the rearrangement and how pretty it is if it loads. But this, I just wanted to say where we are at the moment. We started this 2014. We finished our prototype in 2017. We wanted to ground truth the case studies so that we would give them to a science journalist. We would give the peer-reviewed study, and we'd say, here's Science Surveyor, here are the images and the information that it generated. Would that be helpful to you, or would it not be? We're really hoping it is, but we don't know. It hasn't been tested yet. As I said, Stanford was working with Web of Science, so we didn't get it to work off open access or a public database like PubMed. We restricted it to abstracts and citations so that we potentially could run it off something that would be widely accessible to everybody. We would love to get back to our funding idea because that was really interesting and would be very helpful. And we're really intrigued by our mainstream or outlier function. And this, again, is our very big team. Should I try to look at the live site and see if we move things around? Okay. And I know I went very fast and I probably missed a lot of things, so I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Okay, so it's a site that's on GitHub, and if anybody is interested in looking at it, I can make the, you can either, oh, it's not up there. Get up here. All right, so it's on GitHub, and if anyone sort of wants to play with it and then let me know what you think about it, that would be wonderful. There are the case. Whoa! All right. The top. Bring down the So that shows you that the articles that are most similar in language are not being highly cited by this study. But you can see that ones that are less so, I mean, sort of in the middle range, but it's not right up near the top. And let me see if I can. Look at citation rate. And you can see that the most cited studies are not cited by this paper, but the least cited ones, I believe. So that I think is really interesting, and if I were reporting on this, I might use that information to help identify cited papers, highly cited papers that this paper is not looking at, and use that to find a good outside source. So the idea is generally just to give journalists a big picture, more context, so that they can do better reporting on deadline and not just rely on the authors of the study and the press release, but that they really go as deep as they can on very short notice. I hope that made some sense. I'm happy to answer some questions. Any questions?
All right, so we will take questions from the audience. We have mics set up, so please do use the mic so that everybody in the auditorium and also our webcast can hear you.
Hello. I have a question to Sarah. Oh, sorry, I didn't present myself. My name is Ksenia. I'm from Higher School of Economics. It's a university in Moscow. So we are like a Porsche university, more Porsche right now than Lomonosov State University. So I wanted to ask two questions which are related to each other. How many people are working in your department of public relations, and how do you choose the articles about which to do press releases? So is it by Q1, Q2 journals, or is it by themes, interesting or not, or how? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a team, our central communications team is roughly about 40 people. That's a lot bigger than it used to be, certainly. But that includes our research communications team, which I'm part of, and that's made of 6 people. And then we have other sort of crisis communications, internal, web and social, film, alumni communications, public affairs, and public engagement, and then things like brand and reputation, that sort of thing. So a sizable press office, I think, compared to maybe other UK universities, but certainly much, much smaller than our peer Ivy League universities in the United States, certainly. We also have very few communications officers outside of the central office, so there's very few in the departments and the colleges. Cambridge is extremely decentralized and very bottom-up, which makes it challenging in a communications perspective in terms of getting everyone on to sing off the same page. In terms of how we choose stories, it's story first. I'm not going to necessarily just choose something because it's in Nature. A lot of times we get researchers who come to us and say, but I've got a paper in Nature. And that's great for them, but it's not going to be a story. If I'm going to issue a press release, I want to know that at the minimum it's going to get national coverage, if not international coverage. I don't want to waste a journalist's time, and I want me to be a trusted source for them who gives them good stories. So basically, can I tell the sort of so what that Shannon was referring to? Can I make it relevant? I don't want to just stick to tropes. The UK science media can be quite tropey in the types of science that they cover, so we try to push them a little bit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But basically, just what's the most interesting story? What do we think that people are going to want to read? Thanks.
Thanks for a really interesting discussion. My name is Smita Agarwal and I handle media relations at International Food Policy Research Institute. One of the things that I'm wanting to know from you guys is how do you involve researchers in your outreach efforts? And we've had successes, we've had not successes, so how do you build that bridge? Thank you.
That's a great question, and I actually run a community of practice for institutions supported by the Department of Energy. So if you work for an institution, including a university, that gets Department of Energy funding, let me know and I can add you. And this is what was actually our topic this month. So there's actually quite a bit of science of science communication research on that, and one of the key things is really help understanding why researchers may or may not want to do science communication in the first place and addressing those needs and concerns. A lot of researchers don't think it's basically worth their time, and helping them understand that it is and why and how it helps you get funding and how it helps attract, again, your institutional leadership can be really helpful. Also, support from that institutional leadership, whether it's the research dean or the president even of the university, saying communication is important. You guys need to help participate. You know, they can't do their jobs without you, and their jobs are important. Another thing people said that when I talk to our experts, our folks who do this, is sort of informal opportunities to do science communication, kind of help people get their feet wet. They offered presentations and like brown bag lunches on communication subjects that the researchers themselves wanted to know about, like how to write an effective email. They said it was packed for that seminar, and that helps them know you, helps them know you're a source that they can come to for advice, and then you know them so that when you go and say, hey, you have a study coming out, can you tell me about it? They're like, oh yeah, I took that Learn It lunch from you. Yeah, sure, I'll help you out. Another one was how to give effective presentations, because everybody knows scientific presentations sometimes. So being able to establish those relationships outside of, hey, can you talk to me about this press release I'm writing? They said could be really helpful. And then the other thing they said was doing sort of these mini media training sessions when there is time for a press release. Maybe you give formal media training, lots of us do, but then a scientist is like, I'm never gonna do that, I'm not gonna come to that. But oh wait, they have a study coming out in Nature, and oh wait, there is a press release now. Well, that gives you an opportunity to say to them, you're gonna have reporters calling you. Let me help you be able to work with these reporters in a way that's gonna make both of you happy. You know, here's some guidelines. Make sure you get back to them on time. You know, this is the kind of deadlines they work on. Here's what they're looking at from you, from you. Here are the kinds of questions they're gonna answer. So again, building those relationships and trust to make sure that researchers know who you are and will feel comfortable with you when you have to come to them for something.
Thank you.
Question for Sarah, and others can weigh in as well. My name is Matthew. I'm from the University of Waterloo. In the vein of story first, which I believe in, let's talk about managing up. So I mean, I have a lot of metrics, and I try to educate people above me as to not be blatantly self-promoting about stuff that's not generally of interest to people. Wondering if anyone here has any other sort of skills, tricks, tips, things that they can use to measure your ability and show others what's working and what's not.
Yeah, metrics are tough. Exactly. I think it's about making clear that metrics, whether that's website hits or column inches as we used to call them, they're just one measurement. But it's about making sure that it's a two-way conversation, knowing how many times that somebody comes to you and asks them to do a story, and just asking the very basic questions, sort of, why do you want a press release? Why do you think the media is the way to reach the people you want to reach? Who do you want to reach, and why, and what do you want them to think? And too often it sort of stops them in their tracks because they haven't really thought about it. They're just like, well, I just want to be in the New York Times. Well, that would be great, but...
We all do.
Yeah, I mean, right?
For the right reasons.
And I love it if I get a story in the New York Times, obviously. But I think it's about sort of just interrogating why it is we do what we do and what it is that we want to achieve, which sounds really basic, but it's amazing how many times people haven't really thought about it. Our university isn't very good at strategy. We're very sort of loosey-goosey in terms of saying, you know, where does Cambridge want to be in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, another 800 years?
So it's not just us.
Yeah. So yeah, it is a challenge, and I can't claim that I have the answer to it, but I think it's just about the stories we tell. It's about building a certain, you know, well-being, a sort of good reputation of the University of Cambridge, that we're sort of a source of quality stories and quality research, and sort of we're a trusted voice in the conversation. And that things that just say, you know, Cambridge is top of this ranking that, you know, no journalist is going to cover, because who cares, that doesn't really add to the quality of that conversation.
Agreed.
I'll share a little experience from my time as a press officer at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I was fortunate enough to be working in a very small office that had a specific media relations mandate, and so we were able to clarify what the office was for, and really only focused on things that we thought were newsworthy. But that didn't mean that we didn't spend a lot of our time building relationships with scientists. We operated like a newsroom in the sense that we only picked stories that we thought would have media interest, because that's how we measured. But we knew that we couldn't dismiss anybody who doesn't, at that point in time, have a national story. And so we did spend a lot of time explaining what we do, and we did ask them why you want to do this. And I think that we take for granted the language, the jargons that we know in our industry, and that oftentimes when a scientist comes to you and say, I want a press release, that's their only vocabulary to say, I want to tell my story.
Yeah.
And so really drilling down and say, what do you mean by that? And who do you want to reach? What do you want to achieve? And oftentimes what we learned was they just want their peers to know what they're doing. And so we can work with them on you know, placing something in the department newsletter. Or they say, you know, we're looking for industry collaborators. So maybe we're looking at a trade magazine and not the New York Times. And not everybody's going to get into New York Times, but everybody has a story to tell. So that's worked really well in my experience, in really identifying what they want to do and help them find the right way to do it.
Hi, I'm Andy Fell from UC Davis. Just to pick up on Brian's point, there are so many channels now you can use to get your message out. And as you say, sometimes people say, I want a press release, but what they really want is a trade publication or a blog post or a tweet or something like that. But what I wanted to ask about was Sabine's presentation. I think as PIOs, we're all familiar with the news release that you write by template, which I can write in my sleep some of these stories. They're very, so thank you, we can take that away. A lot of the science news, though, a lot of what I do is interpreting that language into regular English. And I can look at an abstract of a paper, and that's already supposed to be the summary of the paper. So how good can your algorithms get at turning a paper into a lay language summary that I can scan and use?
I didn't know you could read my mind. We're actually working on second generation summaries. I'm hoping to see samples at the end of this month, and that's precisely our core objective, to reach to the point where we have good enough quality plain language summaries, structured like a news story, answering the key questions: who, when, what, where, how, and so on. And it's definitely the kind of things we're already working on, and I hope to be able to have an answer for you very soon. So keep in touch.
Hi, my name is Carla Cantor. I am Director of Science and Tech Communications at Columbia University with a focus on interdisciplinary science. My question, or the bane of my existence, is faculty awards. And I was at Rutgers University for 15 years, and we were somewhat successful in being able to put the award in context. It's really a great way to know what the scientists are doing. But at Columbia and also at Rutgers, I found that when I did that, and I'm assuming you all have faculty who review what you write, yes? They wanted the award up there. And it doesn't move the needle. I mean, sometimes, once in a while. And everything is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize, right? So there is a lot of pressure to put out these releases on the awards. They take up a lot of time. Trying to think of other ways, rather than we've tried just a listing and send it out in an email, that doesn't seem like enough. So anyone who can help with that, let me know.
Yeah, a lot of groans in the room on that one. So when they come to you with some random award, are they thinking that they're going to get media coverage out of it?
I think they're more interested in their colleagues.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, most of them, they just, that's their audience. So what we've done, I think, sounds like we've done a similar thing to you, is that we have kind of an automated form filling thing for awards, because again, it was taking up too much of our time as well. And then farming out to, a department, or Cambridge is a collegiate system, which is very weird. The college office, and that might be of more sort of farming it out. But yeah, it's a tricky one, because a lot of times, sometimes they just really push on it, and that's when we have to say, we want to get media coverage, and I'm really sorry, and congratulations, and that's great, but it's not a story that most journalists would write about.
I think there's a nice place social media can come in also, because you can tag the researcher if they have a Twitter handle, you can tag the award if they have a Twitter handle, and then sometimes they'll retweet it, and that's where most of their colleagues are also. And it's a little bit more public than say any newsletter or something like that. And so you can point to that and be like, oh look, it's here on our Twitter feed. Isn't that great?
That's true. I have a Twitter platform called @Design. Oh, sure. So there's people online. I have a Twitter platform called @Columbia Science. It's not, that visible. I think there are 6,000 or 7,000 people following it. The problem is that the really important channel is the @Columbia University-wide, and they would be tweeting that out all day. So when I say to my colleague, what do you think? Yeah, once in a while. So
may I jump in? Because we do create a lot of stories on behalf of science publishers. We help them raise the profile of the science they publish. And we found from experience that one thing that works really well when the topic is not really that sexy is to create Q&A interviews. And also talking to PIOs in Europe, they say sometimes there's a superb news story, but when they look at the data analytics online, what people actually read is the Q&A, not the actual story. So sometimes you can play with format, and there's an expression in the marketing field called content atomization to describe this phenomenon that you have a core news story, but then you decline it in multiple sub-stories that are formatted for different channels, social media and others. So sometimes it's about tweaking, how you tell the story.
Back at UBC, we created a content type called Q&As, and we would come up with just 3 questions, and we force the researcher to give us plain language answers. And so, we might do that as an acknowledgement, as an award, that at least it becomes sort of an interesting story. But we pose the questions, so we try to make questions relevant to the audience. I also think that in terms of because oftentimes researchers are trying to let their peers know about their honors, that in the sense of creating your audience, that maybe using your social media channel as a way to create new audiences that will magnify your other stories by tagging, the scientists or their department and allowing them to follow your channel for future use of other content, then that makes the time spent on that award announcement more of a good investment for the future.
Hi, I'm Richard. I'm coming from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, working as a PIO. I have a very basic question, silly, and what do you think is the most important professional quality for a PIO, and how do you think is the career of a PIO? The reason why I asked it because PIO is a very brand new idea in our country, and the Chinese Academy of Sciences is trying to build this professional PIO system. So it would be great if you could give us some idea. Thank you very much.
I think I'm going to sound corny, but I'm just going to say, for me, it's just a passion for science, for research, and being interested in it. I don't have a scientific background either, but I'm just really, really interested in it, and I'm really, really interested to meet new people and learn new things, and just, unending curiosity. And I think also just, having a good nose for a story, knowing which sort of media that you're targeting, if media relations is your goal, and just having a really good sense of your local media environment, your national media environment.
I would add to that the ability to, and this is true of anybody in science communication. I know I didn't consider myself a PIO until I joined Office of Science. I didn't even know what that was, but I did science communication. And that's the ability to translate scientific language into whatever, your home institution's language is. That's in a non-scientific or non-technical sense. Having the ability to find a great story, but then be able to translate and interpret it to help it be useful to other people who aren't scientists in that field, or even maybe scientists, but just not in that field, is a huge, huge thing. And I found, talking to fellow PIOs, sometimes that skill doesn't just come from science communication. I've talked to folks who worked in, one of them was the communications person for when they were redoing the Bay Bridge, and he had to talk about all this really technical stuff going on with the Bay Bridge and make it relevant to the community. Somebody else had been in art museums and take all this really art museum jargon and make it interesting to other people. So it's a skill that's especially important in science, but I think you can get people who aren't science communicators and get them into science communication if they have that skill.
Hello, this is Iqbal Pilwala from UC Riverside. I had a question about videos. Our video team is almost insistent on keeping the videos very short because they claim that people's attention spans are dwindling even as we speak. And I was hoping that you could provide some tips for making effective science videos. Our researchers would like to be talking heads in the videos. Our video crew says talking heads don't work. It needs to be more catchy, sort of interesting visuals. And I can see their point, but I'm wondering how do you strike a balance in your own videos? Thank you.
So we're producing videos, and we have a growing demand for videos because sometimes a video replaces pages and pages of text. You can condense things quite easily. So we use extremely skilled script writers. That's, I think, to me, it's the most important part of the video production, mechanism. We also have teams that are really in tune with the latest technology, where you can insert text, over the image. And I totally agree with the people who have been advising you that a video online shouldn't go beyond 3 minutes unless it's for the purpose of educating, maybe a professional audience, when it's more, an explainer type video. But if it's designed to be spread on social media, 30 seconds, 1 minute, and you can also vary by calling upon animations. People really like this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of commercially available solution. But if they don't get the script right, I guess it's more where you can bring in, your skill and talent. We do these things for publishers and for people, universities and so on.
Yeah, we do videos anywhere from 30 seconds to 30 minutes. But again, the sort of keeping things short for social media, yeah, that's fine. But a lot of times we use it as a trailer to go to our YouTube channel, where we actually do have quite good views and quite good engagement with longer videos, because you're trying to explain a complex issue. We did one recently on dementia that was 24 minutes, and we got tens and tens of thousands of views, because we were telling it's a very complex issue, and there's lots of different fields of research feeding into it, and we were using it as that. It's an education tool, and we would sort of use the sort of shorter clips to push people to the longer video.
Sort of the other flip side of that, like, super highly produced, is I think there is a place for, if you have some really talented, engaging researchers, to bring the video out in the field and have it feel very natural, and having them explain what they're doing. Again, got to stay short, and they've got to be super excited about it. They've got to be really good on camera. But I've seen some really good scientists do their own science communication using video, and being able to show the process of science and humanize the researchers. But that's for a very different purpose than these kind of more explainer videos.
One question here and the last question.
Hi, my name is David Schwab. I work at Mount Sinai Health System and Communications in New York City. I was interested in the title, beginning with websites. Where I am, there's a lot of talk about websites versus blogs. Blogs are sort of seen as cool and timely and newsy, and websites kind of seem like old-fashioned and staid. So I get a lot of people coming up to me and wondering, what's the difference? How do we see it? I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts they'd care to share about what channel do they use for certain content, specifically a difference, if there is one, between what you see on a web site or a, quote, blog. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think, like a lot of us in this room, we make some content that's just for Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. But I think for us as a university, everything still has to be on the website, because one of our key audiences is obviously potential students, potential graduate students, potential staff, and current staff. So there needs to be some home base for everything that they could need to find. So I think in terms of sharing research, it's not all about driving everyone back to the website, but there needs to be that sort of home place where everything lives. I think that's probably our thoughts on it.
In terms of the website versus blog distinction, a blog is really just a subset of your website. And honestly, it used to be that a lot of websites had separate news and blog sections, and I found that distinction has really started to go away in the last several years, because a lot of the stuff that used to be on the blog part has now moved to social media. So now a lot of times it's just news, and you have a combination of press releases and feature articles and more sort of blog stuff. So I think that's much less of a distinction than it used to be.
I'd like to add as well that it doesn't really matter if people read your news outside your website. The publishers in the mainstream media have come to the realization that Facebook is the largest publisher in the world. And they kind of missed out on that opportunity that, the content is being read on Facebook. It doesn't matter. It's being read. That's all that matters.
Hi, thanks. I'm Jeff Tyson from Cornell University. I wanted to ask Marguerite a little bit more about Science Surveyor, because it seems to me a really useful tool for journalists. But I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about how PIOs might use it as a tool either for identifying stories that are newsworthy and maybe even also as a pitching tool, if possible.
We didn't get, we hoped that it would start with journalists, but then it could be used by anybody who wanted to sort of get background on a topic quickly. And the Stanford team in particular was really interested in looking at some of interdisciplinary collaborations and also on trends so that we could, again, not just journalists, but people could look for emerging stories, something that seemed to be building, that there were more studies on and maybe more collaboration around, but hadn't really come to people's attention so widely yet. We didn't get that far, but the idea was really the point you're getting at, that this could be really broadly used. And one of the members of our team was really, he works in a lot of different areas. He's based in architecture. He was the designer behind this, but he works on all these different topics. And he was thinking, oh, I would just like this for myself so that any sort of new field I'm going to work in, I could quickly just sort of get a sense of the big picture. But if it ever ends up out in the world, it would be ideally, for everybody to use, and not just to get journalists to report better, faster. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I want to thank the amazing team here at Eureka who helped make today possible. Jen Holshu, Shelby Toller, Seth Rose, Joe Howell Wood, Tamara Alpson, Jermaine McDonald, and Spencer Richardson. And thank you, our panelists, for sharing your expertise. Thank you for taking part in this seminar, for supporting Eureka and for your dedication to communicating science broadly. Again, this session will be available on video early next week. If you haven't already, please join the Eureka PIO Forum. It's an online discussion platform for fellow science communicators. Email pio@eureka.org for an invitation. And it's also the basis of the DOE community of practice, so it's on the same platform. If you're taking part in the AAA's annual meeting, please join us tomorrow night at the Marriott for the Eureka reception. I'm sure there's a lot more conversation that can happen. I want to finally announce the winner of the 2020 PIO Seminar. Free reg is Lori Friedman from Lehigh University. And thank you. We'll see you next year.